It started with that weird, almost heavy quiet, you know the one, where the sun is so hot it feels like the match is happening underwater, 36 degrees Celsius. North Carolina turned into a frying pan, and in that stifling heat, Benfica did something absolutely outrageous. Something I wasn't emotionally or spiritually ready for. They beat Bayern Munich. For the first time. Ever. Let's take a breath and rewind to the first half. The ball barely had sweat on it before it was in the back of the net. 13 minutes. Andreas Schjelderup, a name that sounds like a Scandinavian mystery novel, pops up at the edge of the box and slides the ball low into the corner. Cool as an ice bath. Fredrik Orsnes sets it up like he's hosting a garden party. Pulls it back, serves it on a plate. Schjelderup eats it up. 1-0 Benfica, and suddenly the sun didn't feel so oppressive. It felt like a spotlight. It wasn't just a goal. It was a spark in a game where everyone looked half-melted. Bayern? Disjointed. 7 changes from Company, and the whole first half felt like a chemistry experiment with the labels scratched off. They were playing like they'd just wandered onto the pitch after a nap in a sauna. Loose passes. Zero control. Zero bite. And Benfica? I don't know what they drank pre-match, iced rocket fuel? But they were alert. They were crisp. They were moving like they'd trained for this heat. Maybe they had. Maybe they just wanted it more. Or maybe they saw Bayern in front of them and thought, why not now? Every time Benfica broke, there was danger. Angel Di Maria, 37 years old and still looking like he's got batteries in his boots, starts the move for the goal, nearly scores himself with a curling left-footer later. The man knows how to script an exit. Last tournament with Benfica, headed back to Rosario Central, and here he is dancing around Bayern like he's back in 2014. And let's talk about the heat again. Because it wasn't just hot, it was biblical. Like, if locusts had flown across the pitch, I wouldn't have blinked. There was a cooling break at the 30-minute mark, and I've never seen grown men look more relieved. Bayern players were draping cold towels over their heads, like they were attending a spa day for the hopeless. This wasn't just a match. It was a survival exercise. You could feel the tempo dragging. Not because the game lacked intensity. No, that was there, bubbling under the surface. But because the players were literally melting. Passes slowed, runs faded. It wasn't football. It was heat stroke in slow motion. And yet Benfica found a way to cut through it. Every time they attacked, it looked like a mirage had come to life. Schjelderup's goal? The clearest moment of the half, like a glass of cold water thrown into Bayern's confused face. And Bayern? They looked like they couldn't believe they were in this situation. Down 1-0. To Benfica, a team they've handled every single time in history, until now. Company on the sideline looking like he was solving a Rubik's Cube made of fire. Every substitution a desperate attempt to shake the game awake. That first half was a story of shock, of a team refusing to be anyone's historical footnote. Benfica didn't just survive the heat, they thrived in it. They drew their lines in the scorched earth. 1-0 at halftime and the world tilted just a little. Bayern looked human, and Benfica? They looked like believers. And then came the second half. A slow burn that built into something frantic, feverish, almost fever-dreamed. Bayern came back out like a team that had been yelled at. You could smell the urgency wafting off them, like they'd been reminded that yes, in fact, they are Bayern Munich, and losing to Benfica wasn't on their summer bingo card. 3 changes at the break: Harry Kane, Joshua Kimmich, Michael Ollis, all in one go. Company pulled the pin on the tactical grenade and threw all his prestige players at the problem. It was like seeing a blockbuster sequel introduced mid-movie. And for a few heartbeats, it looked like it might actually work. Kimmich, calm, precise, clinical, thinks he's scored. A peach of a strike from 25 yards, low, clean, past everyone, into the net. But then the dreaded acronym enters. Video Assistant Referee. Offside. Not because of Kimmich himself, but because Kane was loitering in front of Trubin like a man trying to block someone's view at the cinema. And just like that, the goal dissolves. One of those moments where the rules are right, but your heart feels wrong. Still, Bayern pressed, and pressed, and pressed. You could see it in their faces, the pride, the disbelief, the sweat. Pavlovic had a go. Saved. Leroy Sane missed once, then again. Trubin, in the Benfica goal, started to resemble a mystical forest creature. Untouchable. Unflappable. saving shots like he'd read the script in advance. The whole match became a war of belief. Bayern had all the possession, all the pressure, but Benfica had this grit, this stubborn, sun-scorched willpower that refused to break. Every clearance felt like an act of defiance, every block like a middle finger to history. And all the while, the Heat remained a third opponent. You could see it in the way players moved. Heavy legs, dragged bodies. A second cooling break at the 68-minute mark, as if the football gods themselves needed a timeout. It wasn't just a match, it was attrition. And Benfica weren't just surviving, they were denying, smothering, interrupting Bayern's rhythm with little fouls, quick switches, tactical fouls that winked at the clock. The tension got thicker by the minute, into the last 10, and it's panic mode for Bayern. Every corner, every half chance feels like it might be the one. But no. Trubin again, then a block, then a wayward shot. Time, that most precious currency, slipping through their hands like sweat. 8 minutes of added time. 8, it felt like a lifetime. And Bayern threw everything they had at it. But Benfica, this stubborn, sizzling machine, held. Every clearance now felt like a victory parade. Every whistle from the ref another nail in Bayern's well-manicured coffin. And when it ended, when the whistle finally, mercifully blew, Benfica hadn't just won. They'd exercised history. They'd stood in the sun and said, no, not this time. They didn't just beat Bayern. They survived them, outlasted them, dared them to chase shadows while the temperature turned the pitch into a skillet. It was raw, emotional, the kind of second half that doesn't just entertain, it clings to you. You feel it in your ribs, you replay it in your head. You know you've just watched something that doesn't happen every day or every decade. Because for the first time ever, Benfica beat Bayern Munich, and they did it under the harshest light imaginable. Let's talk about these two teams now, what they were, what they tried to be, and what they ended up revealing about themselves in 98 chaotic, boiling minutes. Bayern Munich walked into this match with a strut, as they often do. Group already secured, 7 changes, rested legs. It was like they brought their crown to the stadium and assumed someone would polish it mid-match. Vincent Kompany, who's still carving out his managerial DNA, tried to play it clever. Rotate the squad, save the legs. But that plan wilted in the sun like cheap plastic. Because what Bayern ran into wasn't just heat, it was Benfica, defiant and ready. This was a Bayern team that, on paper, should have had no business struggling. Even the rotated lineup had enough talent to light up a continent. But there was something disconnected. In that first half, they weren't Bayern. They were a rehearsal version of Bayern. Passing without conviction. Movement without meaning. It was like watching a band forget their own set list. And when the starters came on, it helped, sure. But it also underlined the point. This team still depends on its top tier to clean up the mess. Kompany will point to the second half, and yeah, they were better. They had all the hallmarks of a team that suddenly remembered it had a legacy to defend. But they couldn't convert, couldn't break through. And in the end, it exposed a brittle truth. This Bayern squad might be deep, but they're not invincible. You rattle their rhythm, get a keeper standing on clouds, and suddenly they look mortal. Benfica, on the other hand, looked like a club with a vendetta. The kind of vendetta that sits quietly in your suitcase for years, waiting for a hot afternoon in North Carolina. They played with that beautiful underdog arrogance, sharp in transition, lethal in the press, and organized like monks on caffeine. This wasn't luck. It was planning. It was discipline. It was emotion wrapped in structure. And when they scored, they didn't sit back in panic. They played. They dared. They carried the match like it was a badge of honor. Di Maria orchestrating in the half spaces like a man with nothing left to prove and everything left to give. Renato Sanchez, gritty and purposeful before he had to limp off. Even the substitutions were tight, precise, timely. You got the sense this team knew exactly how much chaos they could afford and when to slam the brakes. But maybe what this match really showed us is that football is still beautifully unpredictable. You can be Bayern. You can bring Kane, Kimmich, Sane, the whole cavalcade of Champions League dreams, and still lose to a team that just wants it more on the day. That's not weakness. That's football. That's why we watch. And Benfica? They just climbed Everest in flip-flops. It might not mean a trophy. It might not even mean they go deep in the tournament. But this match, this day, They will remember it forever. Because beating Bayern isn't just a win. It's a headline. It's a story they'll tell their kids. And for Bayern, it's a bruise. Not a wound, not yet. But a very real reminder that even giants can slip. Even in the sun. Especially in the sun. Let's get into the individuals. The beating hearts, the wild cards, the ghosts and gladiators of this match. Because if teams tell a story, players are the authors, editors, and occasional dumpster fires. Let's start with the man of the moment. Anatoly Trubin. If Benfica built a fortress, Trubin was the drawbridge, the moat, and 3 angry dragons. Bayern must have felt like they were trying to score on a cheat code. Every time the ball zipped toward goal, there he was, stretching, diving, reaching into some alternate dimension to keep it out. That save on Pavlovic? Reflexes like a horror movie jump scare, and then denying sane, twice, like it was personal. If he wasn't sweating, he might have actually been made of granite. And then, Schjelderup, the scorer, the unlikely assassin. His finish was clean, clinical, and shockingly calm for a moment that big. What's wild is how ordinary it looked, just a side-footed finish into the corner. But that's the magic, right? He made it look inevitable. The boy who broke Bayern. He'll be dreaming about that goal for the rest of his life, and probably making everyone around him sick of hearing the story by next Tuesday. Fredrik Orsnes deserves a paragraph of his own. He didn't score, but he made the goal happen. Dragged the defense, squared it back like a surgeon, and gave Schjelderup the kind of assist that screams football IQ. He was everywhere. Always in the frame, always useful, always 1 second ahead of Bayern's midfield. If you blinked, you missed him. But if you watched close, you saw the engine room of Benfica's resistance. Now let's talk about Di Maria. 37 years old and still playing like he's got a grudge against time itself. His movements, his passing, his presence, it all carried a kind of veteran gravity. He doesn't run like he used to, but every step meant something. And starting the move that led to the goal, of course it was him. Then to come off late and get that ovation, it felt like an old soldier saluting his battlefield. Emotional, poetic, unbearably cool. Over in Bayern's camp, it's a more complicated picture. Kimmich came on and immediately looked like he was operating on a higher wavelength. That disallowed goal was a work of art, brushed aside by a technicality, but he set the tempo, tried to pull the strings. The fact that he was Bayern's best midfielder in 45 minutes tells you all you need to know. Harry Kane? Let's call it what it was, a cameo of frustration. A few decent touches, a blocked shot, and one moment of unfortunate obstructing that wiped out Kimmich's goal. Kane looked like a man trying to plug holes in a sinking boat using only his reputation. Bayern needed a hammer. Kane brought a fine china teacup. Leroy Sané might be waking up in a cold sweat thinking about this match. 2 massive chances. One shot blasted into the air like he was trying to swat a mosquito on the moon, the other straight at Trubin. It wasn't a disaster class, it was a haunted house of missed opportunities. And let's not forget the defenders. Otamendi. A walking bruiser with a yellow card, a million clearances, and the kind of body language that says, not today. Upamecano. Caught flat more times than a pancake in a steamroller. And Jonathan Tah? Thrown into the chaos, tried to fix it, didn't quite. So what do we take from this character parade? Some stars shined, some dimmed, some exploded, and others quietly carved their names into the underside of this match, just waiting to be discovered by the people who really watched. Benfica's players, on a day too hot for poetry, gave us one of the most poetic wins they've had in years. This has been Across the Pitch. Over and out.